Featured reader for the second half is Toni Mirosevich, who comes down to us from San Francisco this evening. Toni is the author of 6 collections of poetry and prose, most recently The Takeaway Bin, which we do have, I believe, on our book table. Her book of nonfiction stories, Pink Harvest, which you also have, received the first series in Creative Nonfiction Award, and her poetry chapbook, My Oblique Strategies, received the Frank O'Hara Chapbook Award. Her multi-genre work has been anthologized in Best of the Bellevue Literary Review, Best American Travel Writing, The Gastronomica Reader, The Discovery of Poetry, and elsewhere. Literary fellowships and residencies include the MacDowell Colony, Jurassic Resident Artist Program, Hedgebrook, and Blue Mountain Center. She's a professor of creative writing at San Francisco State University and former director of the Poetry Center and American Poetry Archives. And you can find out more about her on her website as well. So welcome, Toni.
Thank you for that lovely intro. And thank you, both of you. Jean also for inviting me. Where are you? There you are. So nice of you to do that. And I'm so happy to be here again. I was here a few years back and just thought this is just a lovely, lovely place to have a reading and such a warm and welcoming spot. And I know Sammamish Lake, by the way. There's in mental health circles, there's the split personality. And in writerly circles, there's the split personality for writers as well. So sometimes some of us write poetry and prose, and then you become a multiple personality person and you write poetry, prose, and plays, and you go on and on. Well, I kind of go back and forth between the two, between poetry and prose. So I'm going to read a little bit of both tonight. And the book, The Takeaway Bin, came at a time when I had written a book of prose, and it was sometimes kind of deep and heavy stuff, and I wanted to clear the mind a little bit. So my partner got me something which some of you may know. It's The Oblique Strategies by Brian Eno and Peter Schmidt. And this is a book of cards that there's over 100 cards, and if you have a dilemma, a working dilemma, any dilemma, you just pick a card, and it'll give you a strategy to apply to that dilemma. So were I to have a dilemma tonight, like, what do I say next? Well, I'd pick a card, and it would say, perfect, faced with a choice, do both. Which is exactly what I'm going to do tonight. Poetry and prose, swear to God, just picked a card. So tonight, during this time, if you need a card, if you have a dilemma, just raise your hand. I'll pick a card for you, okay? I can't not read this first poem today, and hopefully that'll be noticeable by the end of the poem. The poem is called Human Flaw. And again, I would pick a card and then, to clear the mind a little bit, start to riff on it. So these poems kind of tumble forward with whatever collects around the strategy. So the strategy is a favorite of mine: humanize something free of error. Humanize something free of error, the human flaw. Is it the human flaw or the tragic Is it the human flow or the tragic flaw? Either way, it's a blemish on an otherwise white placket. Every minuscule spot is noticeable and brings to mind not one, not two, but all of our imperfections, our double-trouble duplicities, our less than pleasant lack of pleasantries. The sad fact is we're sometimes liars, sometimes cheats. Oh, heavenly day, let's admit it. To be human is to have more flaws than a bird dog has fleas, so let's elevate our errors, not banish them. The time you pocketed the extra change from the checker, knowing full well at the end of the night her till would be short? Did you picture her adding up the day's receipts again and again and still not step up and return that extra $5? Or the time you heard the cry for help on the phone machine, someone needing a ride, an ear to bend, a favor, then lied and said you never received the call? Admit it, you don't always think the best of your fellow man. You don't always assume the best of intentions. When the man sneered, "Go get married," as my lover and I strolled queerly by, was it kind to fire back, "Small minds, small dicks"? Tragic error, especially when he and his buddy, the fellow riding shotgun with a shotgun, tailed us home. Go ahead, humanize him. His finger on the trigger and the cashier who lied about the total, and you with the $5 in your pocket, the epithet echoing. Try to make a getaway. They just allowed same-sex marriages to happen immediately tonight. Immediately. Immediately. It was like, I was watching the news, 5 o'clock news, and they said Kamala Harris comes down from wherever she came down, and the couple who had brought up the Supreme Court case, the two women, I forgot their names, they did this. It was like immediate. So the floodgates are open, so to speak. So when someone says to me, "Go get married," I'll say, "Well, I am." Another poem here is, let's see. There's a poem called Sectionals, and let's read that one too. Sectionals, the oblique strategy for that one is what are the sections of? Imagine a caterpillar moving. She offered me a section of her blood orange, the Russian way, a slice of red sunset falling into my palm. It's sweeter when you share, she said, as we sat on the sectional sofa. Around the bend, there's Section 8 housing for those in need of a hand. Late at night, there's always a party started. If you wouldn't mind, section off a little piece of that lemon pie, said my Aunt Marcella, or the next thought, a new philosophy in bite-sized bits. I could do with a slice, said the homeless man when offered some pizza. He hadn't eaten in days. What was he trying to tell me? That, like a caterpillar, we're all made up of sections, each of us connected, dependent on the next segment of the population to light our way. If, all together now, we move slowly, surely there will be forward progress, though it's hard to discern with the naked eye, to see how the middle of the caterpillar arches up, rises like hope, then slides back down, moving across the page or the highway towards our or our furry friends' denouement. It could be the end of the line. Don't look now, said my lover as she glanced in the rearview mirror. There's only one truck coming down the road, but it's a barrelin'. I love it that the one thing about these poems is that whatever is rolling around in your mind can kind of go in. And my partner grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, and her sister used to say, "Don't look now, but coming down the road, there's one truck and it's a barrelin'." So it did kind of make it into this poem. I was happy to have that happen. The other thing is that a number of these poems were written, and history repeats itself, sometimes sadly. And some of us get a little older also. So this is a poem called Old and in the Way, and the oblique strategy is use an old idea. Now that we're on the upward slope, there are only old or older ideas past their Saturn return. The car's on empty. I've driven my demons out. They wanted some country air. I could dust off the old idea that I'd captain a boat into unknown waters. Then again, once I wanted to be a fireman, once a burger, once a burglar. Ambition's funny that way. I'm without a plan, happily without a man, in the thin of it. The kids are taking out their laptops, booting up, and I'm still wearing flats. You have to push on to make it to the end stop. It's not the free fall you imagined, something Pushkin never had to worry about. He just let her rip. The revolution turned old, a little gray around the Kremlin, but Gorby found a winning recipe before they put him out to pasture. Now Putin's found an old idea to capitalize on. He's putting the beat back in the borscht. Putin comes back. Who knew? Amy Donsky, that's an old student. Let me just read two more from these, and then I'm going to switch to prose. This is actually a poem that goes way back, but it's a poem that I'm going to read for Charlotte Muse, because Charlotte Muse and I go way back, and we started at San Francisco State as students many years ago and had a book together, and sometimes over the years, the one thing that you need to do is to persist. And the strategy is just carry on. Even though it would be nice, wouldn't it, to go buck naked into the world, shed snake skin, second skin, but never second sight? It's still unfathomable, isn't it, the degree we need to let go of the past to dress down. There are veils and shadow puppets in the firelight glow, someone's hands all over the strings, ghosts who manipulate. Darling, will you steer? And a story, classic and long overdue, is projected on the screen. Good and evil spring from the same source. A heart of gold is tarnished. Someone gets their comeuppance. Life treads on. The past is clearly no longer of use. Last year's model, the old prosthesis, the circle pin. Yet what is no longer serviceable still persists, like a cough or a mangle. We need some days to make things thin. Let's then for a moment let the old wall heater kick in and warm our backsides with this spanked heat. And then I'll read the last poem of this book and then one short prose piece. The last poem is called The Takeaway Bin because, what happens is that you have all these things in your mind, right? You have all these things, you have memories and old song fragments and little bits. It's like the drawer at home where you throw the batteries and the pens. It's all of that stuff is circling around. And at some point, you want to clear it out, which is actually what the book was useful for. And the strategy is called take away the elements in order of apparent non-importance. Toss out any crummy little axe to grind. The wood's chopped. You have enough for the long, cold winter ahead. Take away what you plan to do today. Trim your nails, build a seesaw, sweep the ocean floor. It's less important to get the worm than to have one last frame of the dream. You were climbing a mountain. At the summit was a cafe called Happiness. Inside in a glowing golden room, people were, yes, happy, quietly sipping their cups of tea. It wasn't important who did what to whom, yesterday's knife in the back. The blade wasn't sharp, your wit less so. Before she takes your order, the waitress points out the daily specials on the blackboard, then tells you to leave what you don't need by the door in the takeaway bin. Your worries, your fears, the go-go boots that never fit, the knitted scarves received as gifts, veils over your eyes, she says. Take away the elements of your unhappiness, then the elements themselves. 5 when we last counted, or was it 4? Fire, water, earth, oh, air it out. She hands you a cup of tea. Now you're ready, she says. Get out of bed. The day lies before you, clean as a slate. It's yours to write on. I dropped something. I'm back to writing prose again, and one thing about prose is that you have a longer line, and it isn't maybe so tightly wound up in what's unfathomably in your mind. You can see something coming in and write about it, but it'll probably send you back into memory anyhow. And so I live by the sea in Pacifica, And the great joy, as Jean knows, is that things come in. I'm from a fishing family, and so whenever something comes in from the sea, like a float, we pick it up and we put it on our deck, and it's a big, big, exciting thing. Because you never know what's coming in and where it's come from and how it's traveled and how it got to you. So this short piece I'll end with is about something that came in one morning, and it's called This Once Bright Thing. Just before dawn, before someone flips the switch, trips the circuit breaker, turns night into day, before light floods the shore, the sand is swept clean, blown clean, cleared of the crumbs left on the carpet of what the cat tracked in, the sea dragged in. On some days, you can see the footprints of a solitary figure who trudged back and forth along the beach, though this morning there are no footprints, no trail to follow, no breadcrumbs or the other leftovers. Bony arms of driftwood, plastic bottles, a length of rope frayed at the end like a ragged wick. You too are frayed at the end of your rope. You've come here to find something, anything, and if there's anything to see, you'll see it. You have an unobstructed view. And then, just when you're about to give up, to turn away, you spot something in the sand. Before you get near, before you take the first step, it's a guessing game. Is it a clear balloon, a discarded jar, a plastic container, a glass float? It looks transparent. Something you can see through, a round window, a porthole, which triggers a flash. You were a child, and the neighborhood kid who mowed your grass left a clear glass jug full of gasoline on the back porch, the gas that made the lawnmower go. As the afternoon sun lowered in the sky, the sun's rays glinted off the glass, struck at the right angle, caused a spark, a flame that licked the sides of the jug, carried up the invisible wick, found the porch, the wall of the house, blew through the back door, came inside. Somewhere across town, fire alarms went off, and somewhere a fireman slid down a pole, and later, after the smoke had cleared, a fireman took you up in his fatherly arms, for your own father was far away at sea, in the middle of all that water, of no use out there, the waves that would never make it to shore in time to put out this flame. As you near the object, you see it's not a jar, a bottle, a float, it's a light bulb. In the shape you've never seen, narrow at both ends and round in the middle, as if someone tried to blow up a balloon, lost heart, and stopped halfway. A tinkerer with the right tools could fit a tiny ship inside this bulb, could raise its sails. That ship could sail along that thin silver line of horizon, the filament, a line that looks as delicate as a spider's web. On the outside of the glass are free floaters, hitchhikers who held on, who came along for the ride, tiny mussels and threads of seaweed and spores, they held on. This object once cast that light onto the water. This fragile thing survived rough seas, was tossed about as we are tossed about by dramas of our own and of others' making. And how do we survive? How did this survive? This fragile glass, this once bright thing that glowed and glowed like memory glows and glows before it is snuffed out, before we forget. Here it is now. Pick it up. Hold it in your hands. Look inside. Is he still back there, the fireman, still out there, the sea captain, still at the back door, your mother calling you in from play? And what of the boy who cut the lawn? Look close. Can you see him now, mowing the grass, trudging back and forth across the sand, as the seas go back and forth, as you go back and forth, from the present to the past to this moment, and through it all, the waves continue, the day continues. Through it all, the morning light continues, bright and curved and sturdy as a flame. Thank you.
That's one bad cat, Harry.